fishing, it's in my soul.
Welcome to the Salt Strong Podcast, disrupting fishing entertainment as you know it. Prepare to laugh. Prepare to get to know fishing legends in a whole new and unfiltered way. And on occasion, you might even learn a thing or two about fishing. Here's your host, Joe Simons. Like diamonds.
Hello, Salt Strong Nation. Joe Simons. Like diamonds. We are back again talking about tarpon. It's going to be a fun one. This has been a hot topic in the past, highly requested. We're getting into season, and kind of a cool story about our guest, Captain Tyler. So Luke had moved to St. Pete area, kind of near that Eckerd College, Maximo Park area. And, Luke's trying to figure it out. And of course, we've got our insider community and super, super helpful. And Luke's like, man, I kind of want to get in some tarpon. And we're kind of just going through Instagram. And we see our boy Tyler, who we'd fished with before. We've actually chartered Tyler in the past, and we're seeing him just like put up tarpon after tarpon after tarpon after tarpon. Like, what is this guy doing? And so I'm really pumped to hear what you're doing each and every year to be just so consistent. It seemed like you were on them almost every day when they were there in St. Pete and Tampa. So I'm pumped to have you. So Captain Tyler Kapela, we got Justin, head of tackle, and then Luke, who is at Little Gasparilla Island, very close.
Oh, yeah.
To Boca Grande, one of the best places in probably the world to catch tarpon. So, or at least used to be.
I'm stocking up on past crabs right now. They just started showing up, so I've got some in the live well. So I'm ready for tarpon this year. I'm going to be taking notes on this podcast.
Cool. Yeah, yep. I used to fish down there quite a bit. It's good, but Sweet. I like it up here too.
And you got Wi-Fi at Little Gasparilla Island?
Yeah, crazy. Really coming into the 20th century up there.
Seriously. I remember going there when, you had to conserve water and stuff, and, you can only flush on number 2. That was part of the deal.
That's pretty primitive.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's get into the real stuff here. So I think the best thing to do is just talk about the where, right? Because I think once you solve that, a lot of the stuff gets easier. And let's just start with, St. Pete, Tampa area where you do a lot of your fishing, Tyler. Like, what the heck, what are you looking for? Like, what type of structure, where in that massive amount of area, where do you look first for tarpon?
Sure. So, obviously it varies quite a bit. The tarpon are fish that move around like an unbelievable amount. If you don't know about their life history at all, their migration is insane. First of all, they start life as little tiny plankton like this, literally hundreds of miles offshore. Sometimes they're getting carried around in the currents. They swim up during the incoming tide, and they swim down during the outgoing tide because obviously they can't fight the current. So they keep doing that, get carried in slowly, and eventually they'll find their way into these back little estuaries. Golf course ponds are a big one. Like around here, pretty much any golf course around the estuaries are going to have tarpon in them because they swim in, get carried through the pipes, and they get in there. And so juvenile tarpon live in these way backcountry kind of areas, even with super low oxygen content. Sometimes when a hurricane comes, you get a big storm surge. They say that somehow the tarpon know how to follow these hurricane storm surge tides, and they'll get into areas that are completely landlocked, and they'll live in there for years because they're one of the few species that can come up, they breathe air. So they'll feed off of little mosquito fish and larvae and stuff like that until maybe the next hurricane comes 10 years later and they get out into the estuary actually. So the juvenile tarpon, when they're like this big, they live in those areas up until a certain size. And then generally once they're about 5-10 pounds, they'll kind of move out into brackish water areas like Manatee River. All of the rivers that drain into Tampa Bay or marinas, you'll find juvenile tarpon in that have a lot of brackish water. Especially deep, like kind of river bends or any kind of deeper pockets in there, you'll see them coming up and rolling. And once they hit about 45, 50 pounds or so, somewhere in there, maybe a little bit bigger, they'll join the actual, mature spawning migration of fish. And those fish, they're coming. So when they come into our area, basically they're coming from the south. So they're coming from even south of the Keys, Latin America, and they're migrating up as it gets warm. So you'll find them in the Keys, March, April timeframe, which they're there big time right now. You'll start seeing them around Marco Island, in Florida Bay, Marco Island, and Fort Myers, like mid-April. Usually they'll start showing up there, and then once we start seeing them down in Sarasota, it's only a week or so before it's like the floodgates open. So there's always a few that stay during the wintertime. So power plants, warm water marinas, things like that. Once the water temperature, you get those few warm days in March where the water temperature hits closest or 70 degrees, something like that. The adult tarpon, maybe the 2% that stayed, will actually start trickling out. And if there's a couple areas like off the edges of big giant flats where the water goes up onto this flat and it heats up throughout the warm days in spring, and then it kind of drains off onto the side, that water will be 4 or 5 degrees warmer than anywhere else. And these early tarpon will kind of go in there and they actually lay up. So you'll see them, like you'll see the dorsal fin and the tip of their tail. You'll be trout fishing out there and you'll see this like 7-foot log just laying there. And if you know these areas, it's pretty, like there's small areas. I'm not going to tell you exactly where they are because it's like it's a really, like, you see one every couple 100 yards, but these are like the big 100, 150 plus pound tarpon. And if you do a little bit of research out there in the water and figure it out, you can start catching, not every day, but you can consistently like see these big fish and at least get consistent shots at them just about every day in March, which is very early. But as it goes March, into April, more and more tarpon start kind of trickling in, and they'll generally concentrate around the bridges. So bridges are a big one, especially, we have the Skyway Bridge here. And that's a main early season spot. Any kind of deeper structure in the bay, such as bridges, even, Port Manatee is a good area. It's got a big drop off there. But bridges definitely, because it holds lots of bait, and the tarpon are just kind of moving around throughout the bay, and then they'll just go and sit on the bridge, and they'll stay there and stack up. So you can just kind of work up and down the bridges and use your bottom machine. Look for the fish on the bottom machine itself, and then obviously look for fish coming up and taking impressive air as they come up and roll. And that's a great time. All the bridges around here, even around Tierra Verde and over towards the beach and up in the bay as well. All these bridges hold tarpon in April. And so basically, we'll start fishing the bridges heavily. You can start catching them consistently, but that's more like you're fishing the spot. You're not necessarily fishing the fish. You're going to the bridge, you're putting a bait out at the bridge, and you'll catch them, but it's not like, okay, there's 150 tarpon come right at us, like make the cast, see them eat it. It's a little bit different. So, but what happens in usually late April, if it's warm, early May sometimes, and always by about mid-May, is that main migration shows up from the south. So it's like, there's a fair amount of tarpon in the bay, all through April. And then all of a sudden, literally like a light switch, there are thousands of fish, like all over the place. And they move into the area and they move around within the area. So it's not like they're just coming through from the south and they keep on going. It's like they come into the area and they move around within the Tampa Bay area, in the bay, on the beach, around the bridges, throughout that entire time. So once that main migration does show up, Bean Point is obviously a really popular spot. It's almost getting like it is down in Boca Grande, kind of where Luke is down there. A lot of boats, but it's, that's the first entrance into the bay. So they're coming from the south and they just pile into Bean Point down there at Anna Maria. But my favorite way to catch them is on the beach. I can kind of go get away from everybody a little bit. It's a pretty popular thing to do now as well, but you can go and on the beach and find your own pods of fish. So out of these main schools that are coming up from the south, different little pods will break off of these main schools and stuff, and they'll start working up and down the beach. Generally in my area, on an incoming tide, they want to go kind of north, and on an outgoing tide, they're going south back towards the main pass. So, the fish will work all the way up, even past the Don Cesar, and work all the way up there. And then as the tide starts to go out, they know that those pass crabs are going to be flowing. It's just their instinct. They know it's going to be flowing out there at the Egmont Channel and the major passes around here, Passage Key and also Bean Point, and even the smaller passes as well. But those same schools. I mean, I've literally followed the same school from St. Pete Beach all the way to Fort DeSoto and like into the Egmont Channel. They just, they know, they all move that way. So, and that's my favorite way to catch them anywhere. You know, you'll see single fish sometimes all the way up to schools of 250, sometimes even more. And that's, 6-10 feet deep, about 100, sometimes just past the sandbar, that second sandbar. Even the swim buoy line is a real popular area where the fish come through. And you'll see them, they'll kind of just work down the beach. And if there's a pass, you get the big shoal around the pass, they'll kind of, a lot of times they'll go right around it. They'll get kind of squeezed. If there's fish near the beach, they're going to go around it. There's fish a little bit more off the beach, they're going to they all get squeezed on the end of those passes a little bit. So that's a good high percentage spot. And, a lot of times also, not all those fish move up the beach. A lot of them, you'll get these mega schools of 200, 500, sometimes 1,000 plus fish that they move up into the bay on the incoming tide, almost all the way to the skyway. And then on the outgoing tide, all they're doing is basically daisy chaining, which a daisy chain is tarpon talk for basically a big school of fish swimming in a circle, tail to tail. So there might be 10 fish doing this, or literally 1,000 or like 500. You can look and you'll see this big, giant, dark donut out there. And it's just a ton of tarpon doing this, And the reason they do that is sharks are obviously their main predator. They got eyeballs on all sides. So if a shark comes, somebody's looking, so they can spook and go the other direction. But anyway, so as the incoming tide starts, they'll move way up into the bay. And then as it starts to go back out, they'll kind of daisy chain, and they're basically letting that tide take them as they daisy chain out to the pass. And then they get sucked out the mouth of the pass. And as soon as the pass crabs start flowing, they kind of feed their way back. They spread out. They're no longer in a school. They all spread out along the surface, and they start feeding on all the pass crabs as they're floating out. Now you can catch these fish, they're a lot harder to find, which is, it's kind of a thing where, it's a needle in a haystack. Even though there's 500 fish, they're in a really tight ball, and they're in the middle of nowhere in the bay. They're not hanging on anything. They're just somewhere between Egmont and the Skyway, right? And there's a lot of water out there.
Yeah.
And the thing is, if you can find those schools, you'll have a whole bunch of fish to yourself. And if you know how to present the bait properly, which we'll get into in a little bit, you can catch them. And, it's a lot of time. It's not just one school. There will be typically multiple big schools of fish, but they're not showing all the time. Like sometimes they don't come up, and not even one fish will roll for 45 minutes, an hour, something like that. So you got to, side imaging is key for that kind of fishing. If you don't have a side imaging sonar, it's not impossible, but it's way more difficult. Because if those fish aren't coming up and showing, they don't just, a shark might spook them, and then all of a sudden they move 300 yards over here, and you're going to lose them on your side. You're on the fish thinking you're getting baits back to them, and all of a sudden a shark spooks them, and they're just gone. I mean, they can be really tough to track, even with side imaging. The one thing, like I keep talking about, on these big schools, typically, that's where the sharks are. That's on the beach. When you get to schools moving up and down the beach, it's extremely rare. At least, mine Egmont's kind of its own animal, because it's right on the main passes there. And the big sharks last year, for the first time I've ever seen, actually came up onto the beach at Egmont in like 2 feet of water every day. And we're like chasing tarpon around right where people were swimming. It's a little sketch, like a super sketch, actually. My trolling motor got attacked twice last year, but just not even, just on the vibrations from the trolling motor, a bull shark came up and whacked it 2 times, separate days. So, but up and down the beach, typically there's no sharks, but up in the bay, those schools are just getting shot. There's big hammerheads and bulls attacking those schools. I'll talk about how to kind of avoid your tarpon getting eaten later on, but anyway, so yeah, it's 3 main areas are the bridges, which there'll be tarpon there early all the way into late summer. When the tarpon start to trickle out a little bit in July, August, there's still some tarpon at the Skyway. And typically, this peak of the season is generally like somewhere between the latest part of May and mid-June is when we see the most amount of fish. And that's, if you're fishing the beach, you could sit in one spot all day. I like to kind of hunt them down and go because they may not be there for a few hours. But if you're sitting in one spot on the beach, you can see 2,000 fish plus coming by. Here's a pot of 100, here's a pot of 50, here's a pot of 200, and they just keep on coming when the tide's right. So it's like the beach, the main passes, and then up in the bay. Those are kind of two different animals, and then the bridges. So really, there's 4 main areas, and each one's got its different techniques and quirks to catching the fish. Like I said, June, sometime between mid-May and early June, somewhere in there. Sorry, late May through mid-June is what I meant. Is peak, and then they start migrating out of the area, start migrating north a little bit. We'll still have a good amount of fish all the way into mid-July typically. Like I'll tell you, usually June is the best month. Last year, July was the best month. We had that weird Saharan dust thing going on. It was like crazy hot. We had a lot of fish, but the water in the Gulf was like 93. It was like 92 degrees. It was insanely hot. So once it started raining in July, we still had a ton of fish around, and I got more double-digit days in July, like hookups than we got in June, which has never happened. But so they're weird. They move around. It's all kind of generalities when you're talking tarpon. It's not like, okay, this is how this is what they're doing today. They're weird. They're the quirkiest fish out there, which is what makes them so cool to catch. Because when you do hit it right and they're going off, it's like it can be insane.
Let's talk about that,
yeah.
and let's stick to the beaches, because I remember last time, Luke, we were down there at Boca Grande. We found the fish. Remember, like they were daisy chaining like school after school. And it's funny you mentioned that, Tyler. We saw one dude. Oh man, he's just sitting there anchored up. He knew the little channel, the little path they were taking. Like he was just right on it. He was just waiting for the fish to come, and then we're chasing them all around. And like it was one of the most frustrating days ever. And that was like my last memory of last summer. What are the mistakes? Like what do you do when that happens? When you're finding them, it's somewhat clear day. You can see them down there underneath your boat. What are the mistakes in terms of positioning and approaching them to presenting the bait, etc.?
Well, sure. So was that in June by chance last year when that happened to you guys?
I believe it's Father's Day weekend, which is June. I think that was that frustrating day. The one. I had multiple frustrating days.
That was we're with our dad, like Father's Day, and like
sure. Well, I'll tell you. I'll tell you what. So it wasn't just you guys. The last year in June, like I said, we had that weird weather anomaly. There's something about tarpon and humidity, whether it's low pressure or just humidity itself, that they love, right? So I've always said it's kind of like I've noticed it with little tiny tarpon. I've fished a couple areas where there's a lot of tarpon like this. They'll be rolling around. They might bite a little bit. As soon as it starts raining just a little bit, those tarpon get happy. Happy tarpon. They'll start rolling around a lot. They'll start eating little bugs. You start seeing them splashing around, and then boom, 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 you start catching them one after the other. So I think what it is the rain. I'll get to the point in a second, but the rain kind of washes in bugs, gets all the little creatures in these estuaries kind of fired up, and that gets the tarpon. The little tarpon, it's like a Pavlov's dog. You ring the bell, the dog salivates, right? It starts raining just a little bit or even a lot, the tarpon go crazy. This behavior seems to this is just my theory, but this behavior seems to continue throughout their entire lifespan, right? So when I've seen adult tarpon before where, it's a hot day or whatever, not biting, tides, whatever the tide's doing, all of a sudden you'll get a little pop-up rainstorm like you do in the summertime, and it just starts sprinkling a little bit. All of a sudden the tarpons start rolling around and they get happy. They're like, and it's just a little bit of rain, it's not changing the salinity, it's not changing the temperature. It could be cloudy all day and they're not biting, and all of a sudden it starts raining and they start biting. There's something about the rain that gets tarpon fired up. Not necessarily like a freak thunderstorm, like you get those big pressure drops and like the temperature drops 30 degrees. That kind of will turn them off for a little bit. But if you just get that nice little light rain, or even like after a mean thunderstorm and it's just kind of raining a little bit, the tarpon love that. So what we're talking about last June, it was normally when it gets hot in June, it's 92 2 degrees, then the clouds just go like this and just rain hard, right? And then the tarpon feed. Well, last June, we had that Saharan dust in the air, and it was very dry, right? Very, very dry. It was so hot. It was just that dust was not letting any clouds form. And there was a 3-week stretch in June, which is when you guys were talking about, right in the middle of it. There were a ton of fish around, but they just were not wanting to bite. I was out there all day, like 10, 12 hours a day. And we were struggling hard to get like 2 or 3 bites for a lot of these days. Which, typically in June, as many fish as we saw, we should have got 10, 15 bites a day. There were tons of fish. So it wasn't, don't feel bad. It wasn't just you guys. Like everybody was, even all the captains and stuff were struggling. But even when the bite is tough like that, there are things you can do. Like I said, I was still getting some bites. So what I was doing when the tarpon are like that, first of all, a lot of times it's nighttime. They can see really well. They'll feed heavy at night. I heard it was just, I didn't fish at night because I was just doing day charters. But a lot of guys that were fishing the bridges at night, if you get these really hot days, doesn't rain for a period, you can go hit the Skyway at night or go hit other spots, and it was supposedly going off because they had to feed sometime, right? Yeah. I was on them from 6:30 in the morning until like 8:30 at night, and just barely getting bites, But what I was saying is, what you can do on these days that it's really tough. I mean, you can downsize your tackle. I'll even go. Typically, I'm using 60 or 80 pound leader. Usually, 50 is stretching it, and I'll go as low as 40 sometimes just to get bites. You might break a fish off, but it's better to jump a fish than not get a bite. And I use FG knot and a big long leader typically, and that's anytime when I'm fishing the beach. Use 10, 12 foot leader, and it's 60 is typically what I use. But you'll see the tarpon. You'll see them do this. They come, here's your bait right here. They'll go, the whole string of tarpon will go whoop, right around the bait. And here's 100 fish just going like this right around your bait over and over and over and over again. And a lot of times, it's frustrating, but you just have to pound them. You just got to pound them. It's like all of a sudden, after 2 hours of that, one will turn around and eat it, and it's just, you're like, man, they're just not biting today. You just have to just believe the next one's going to bite, keep pounding them. Another one thing that I do though is when they're doing that is I'll switch from past crabs. They'll eat a crab when they're hungry. If they're hungry, they want a crab. But when they're not hungry, or they're kind of finicky, a live threadfin will get in there and start doing this, and they don't even want to eat it a lot of times. They'll get a lot of hits where they come up and go, pah! They'll just they just want to kill the bait. So you'll get the, you'll see the threadfin out there freaking out. You'll see the tarpon flash on it. And then you're like, okay. And you're waiting for your line to go, and you reel and nothing happens, and you'll get the threadfin back and it's just smushed. It's like just scaleless, eyes popped out like dead, because the tarpon just came up and went, bah. And that happens. It happens with all other species as well, but especially tarpon. So, but at least, if they'll do that, the bait is in their mouth for a second, and sometimes on the way out, the hook will just get them. And it's just a pure reaction strike. Like they just want the bait out of their area. They don't want to eat it, but they just want to kill it. And that's a good way you can get reaction strikes from a threadfin. There's a nice lively threadfin. It's doing this, and it just triggers something, triggers that reaction, rather than a crab just sitting there. They're just like, nope. Sometimes, like you guys saw, and I saw plenty of times last year. So I'll go down on those crazy difficult days on the beach. I'll, get a thread and you got to make sure they're like lively as well. You can't just get one of those that's been alive for a while. It's kind of like, you gotta, there's a difference between alive and lively. So I always say you need that lively, fresh threadfin is going to get hit 10 times more than one that's kind of half dead. And, if there's a big daisy chain in school, just float that bait right in there. There's definitely a technique to that as well. So you get the school is, they're either going clockwise or counterclockwise. So if they're going like this, I don't know if you can see my hand gestures here, they're kind of coming this way. You want the bait to be basically, so they're seeing the bait first, right? If it's on this side of the school, you're lining the fish first, if that makes sense. The fish are coming from over here. Your line is coming from this direction. So in this direction, they're going through the line to get to your bait. And a lot, they can see so well, they can actually feel the line as well. It's not just sight, they can feel it. So if they're coming from this way into your bait, if the tarpon is heading away from you at all, it's almost, it's worth a cast because sometimes they'll hit it, but it's the fish that's coming at you. If you got a bait going this way and the fish is coming at you, the first thing they're seeing is the bait. So that's a huge, huge thing. If they're going like this away from you and you throw this way, you are way less likely to catch one. Because, I see guys on the beach, this is a good mistake all the time. And I'm like, well, they're just scaring the fish. They're not going to catch them because if the school is here moving away and you'll see a boat behind them casting into the school, all you're doing is lining all the fish and you're pushing them with the boat. In that case, what I would do is go up here, get in front of the school, get a bait into them. So the first thing they see is the bait. That's like people just like, oh, they're the tarpon. They rush over to them and they make a cast into the school. But you got to slow down, just take a deep breath because I know it's exciting and go get in front of the school. And, I'm trolling motor. I'm using the trolling motor away from the school. So I'm almost slow trolling or they move pretty fast typically. The worst thing you can do is have the school come right under the boat. That's like once they see the boat, they can still hit. I've literally accidentally run a school right over with the boat, turned around and thrown in there and caught them when it's good, but it's not good all the time. You want to give yourself the best shot. So that's a huge thing is making sure that the bait is the first thing they see. Like straight perpendicular is okay, even a little bit more, but once you start getting where they're going through the line, you're pretty much out of luck that way. Yeah, that's a good tip for everybody. Yeah. It's just
we made that mistake. Yeah, we had the troll motor down. We were trailing them, slinging lures and even baits, and even on the daisy chain too. We were casting right in the middle with the assumption, something's got to see it.
Yeah,
oh, they saw it all right.
Yeah, no, and that daisy chain, it's critical to get as they're coming around. You're just on the outside of that school as they're coming around this way. So it's like you always want the bait like right here in their face, moving away from them like that. That's how they want it.
So you have to figure out which way the daisy chain is kind of shifting along and get.
Yeah, you just figure out which way they're turning. It's either one way or the other. If they're in a daisy chain, it's a circle. So you always want to be on that side where they're coming right into the bait rather than lining the fish. That's a big one.
Hey, Tyler, I actually had a question for you, especially when fish are daisy chaining, because the presentation for that is, I've tried in years past. I've spent my whole life trying to catch tarpon. It's one of my favorite fish, and they're the most frustrating, mystical wizard fish you will ever come into because they just, sometimes for no rhyme or reason, they don't bite. And I remember one day out around Anna Maria, around Beam Point on the beach, the sun's really high, and you can see the black shadows of 100 fish daisy chaining and milling around, and it's kind of like a school of ants that are just kind of moving around on the beach.
Sure.
And when they would daisy chain, I flipped, I think, 3 different baits in and around the daisy chain pod: crabs, threadfin, even sabiki cigar minnows out there off the beach, which was pretty cool. And the only way I was able to get a bite is if I chopped the tail off of a fresh bait and flipped a fresh live bait dead, like out around the daisy chaining school. And over time, they wouldn't spook or be bothered by a bait fish that's swimming around and aggravating this daisy chain school. And eventually one would pick it up off the bottom.
Yeah.
It was something different that I didn't see anybody else try, and didn't know if, when you find picky fish, I'm sure you're going to go into it, kind of some techniques and tactics you have to get a bite when the traditional means of live bait and leading a fish isn't working out for you. What unconventional things have you needed to do to be successful?
Well, sure. So I'll tell you, around Bean Point in that area on the big shoal down there, it's really weird. So the last really 10 years, I've been a guide for almost 12 years now. So when I first started guiding, and there were a lot of fish down at Bean Point, just all over that shoal. Everybody was going out there and just chumming with whitebait like you would, but for snook, right? Like live whitebait or live threadfin, which is really cool because then all of the tarpon would spread out and like start blasting the baits all over the place. They were skyrocketing like kingfish and like that. And a lot of guys, for whatever reason, I guess just because it's easier to keep the bait alive, whatever, a lot of guys started using cut bait down there. So they would go cast net, 2 5-gallon buckets full of threadfin and chop them up, get in front of the school and start dropping all these baits back. Now that's what everybody does down there. And on the point and stuff down there. And so these fish are just like trained to eat a dead bait down there. The water is super, super clear. Also, like the water is very clear around Anna Maria. It's the clearest water we have. And they used to smash a live bait down there. I've caught very few on crabs down there. Unless the crabs are really flowing out of that pass big time, you might as well not throw a crab at Bean Point. They don't even look at it. It's really weird. Now the same fish, you move up the beach towards Egmont. It's about the beach at Egmont is about 50-50. It's like half threadfin, half crab. And then once you get north of there, unless it's a really tricky bite, like I mentioned, I'm almost using exclusively crabs up and down, Fort DeSoto, Shell Key, St. Pete Beach. It's funny. And they just, for whatever reason, I think it's just because that's what everybody throws all the time. These fish are used to eating dead baits. You got 100 boats out there some days chopping baits up, throwing dead bait in the water. So that's probably what it is. They're also, they get heavily fished. By the time they are hitting us, they've been hit all the way from the Keys all the way on up here. So, and these fish, some of these tarpon are 50 years old. I mean, they live a long time, and what they can remember and what they can't. And so that's for the tarpon to know. But they definitely are heavily pressured, and so I think the dead bait thing, a lot of it is your line is on the bottom, and it's also got all that scent and things like that. So they can't necessarily sense your line looking down. They're everything on the tarpon is designed to look up, but obviously they'll come up and I've seen them suck a bait. They kind of turn their side and they'll suck it right off the bottom like that. There's something about the dead bait down there that they really love. And of course, if you can get in front of a big school of fish down there and just, start chopping up baits, put your trolling motor on anchor mode or anchor up in front of them and just start chopping up baits and drift these baits back into the big schools. Then all you do is you take, you cut the threadfin into 3-4 pieces at a time. So you got lots of pieces of chum, and then I'll put half a threadfin or even a whole threadfin and cut the tail, just like what you're talking about, and just kind of free line it. Right. So you don't want to just open your spool and let it go back into the school, because that little bit of resistance is causing it not to sink with the rest of the chunk. So it doesn't look as natural. You'll see the guys if you go down a fish Bean Point, they're pulling the line off of the reel real fast. So it's going faster than the current is going. That way that bait is just free drifting right with the current and all the other chunks all together. And I mean, you're sometimes, especially in the past, you'll see the boats like lined up. There'll be 30 boats or more than that sometimes. And they're like almost rod tip to rod tip, just like in Boca Grande Pass. But everybody's chunking baits or in front of the school chunking baits back. You want to free line those baits back, like almost to where you got like half a spool of line left or even less. I mean, I let it drift back 100+ yards a lot of times. You're drifting it way, way back, letting that bait just go along the bottom all the way. And all of a sudden that line starts flying off the school, close it up, boom, you got them. So that's the way to do it down. And that's only down there. Like I don't use that technique except for the Skyway. The Skyway, that also works really well, chunking, getting in front of a stall on the Skyway Bridge and throwing baits back. That's a really good way to do it there as well. But up the beach in St. Pete Beach or whatever, like I've seen guys try to do it around Egmont. It just doesn't work. I couldn't tell you why. I mean, they'll eat a cut bait. I've seen guys, no one's really throwing chumming hard around St. Pete Beach and a little bit north of there. It seems to be that it's just the way the fish set up is the way to do it around Bean Point. And that's, it works. It works really well. It's not hard to do if you just set up, throw a bunch of chunks back, and you can just drift baits back in them. It's not my favorite way to catch them. It is definitely effective, and I'll do it if that's like if there's a bunch of fish down there and that's like, you can go down there and get them when it's kind of sparse everywhere else. I'll go down there and I'll do that. But I definitely like to fish the fish. Like I don't cast a lot of times on the beach. You don't really cast until you see the fish coming. And that's more sporting. It's more, casting a single crab to a school of fish, making a good cast, watching them eat it is way more sporting than dropping a chunk bait back, which, trust me, I do it. It's just, it's messy. It's like, there's a million boats everywhere. You're getting snagged on other people's lines sometimes, and it can be a bit of a nightmare, but but it works. So,
what's your rig look like when you're fishing the beaches there? Meaning, what size hook? You already mentioned a pretty long, usually 60-pound leader. What's everything else look like?
Yeah.
I know down in Boca Grande, you got corks everywhere when you see all the guides going out there fishing the beaches.
Sure. So, the cork is more to present the bait rather than as an indicator of a strike. So it's kind of just to keep the crab or the bait fish where it is, or keep it off the bottom. A lot of times if the fish are kind of riding high, I'll put the bait like literally 2 feet under the cork, like right there underneath it. And I'll use, if they're spooky, I'll use a natural cork rather than like a bright orange thing or whatever. Like, it's just so it looks like a piece of floating debris in the water, so it's less visible to the tarpon. My philosophy is less is more. A lot of times, the less, no swivels and none of that stuff. It's just a little cork and then a piece of light leader and a hook. There's none of this other stuff on the entire rig, because they can see. And that's also a weak point in the line. But I got a little hook right here. So this is, you can see it. That's an 8/0 Demon Perfect Circle by Mustad. If you notice, this is a cool little trick. I do this for all of my stuff. That's a little uni knot tied onto the hook right there, if you can see.
Yeah.
So have you guys ever seen that before? It's like but basically what that is when I'm sure you've come across if you use live bait or crab or whatever, you'll put it on there and the bait will slide all the way up the hook and rehook itself. And then it's spinning on the way in. Even if you do get a bite, the hook point is buried in the bait and then you don't hook the fish, right? So I cinched down a uni knot. I've tried like rubber bands and beads and all this stuff like that, but they don't seem to work very well and they don't last. So a uni knot, there's always leader available on the boat. I'll just put like a piece of, 25 or 30-pound test, just cinch that thing down. It slides up a little bit if you want to move it, but just keep it right there in the bend of the hook. And that way that thread fin has to stay right there basically. And that's going to, like, half of your baits will get jacked up if you don't put something on there, and then you're burning fishing time, you're missing bites. So this is a really simple, like, easy tip. This is for snook fishing, like any type of fishing. I use it on my stinger rigs, like whatever. If you're using a live bait, I just started doing this a couple of years ago. I finally figured it out. But yeah, it's like, God, what can I put on here? The beads, whatever. It's like, it was so frustrating, constantly wasting your bait and missing bites and having to reel it in, especially for me dealing with, up to 4 people on the boat at the same time. So that's a really good tip. But
is that just regular mono or mono?
Yeah, whatever. I have fluorocarbon on the boat, so that's what I use. But 25, 30 pound. The thicker stuff, I don't use 60 or 80 for it. It just seems to be a little bit too big to really cinch it down heavy. But 25 or 30 seems to be really good.
That's a cool idea. Yeah, I've seen people use rubber bands, and there's even rubber products made for it. But yeah, that seems like a really smart idea. I've never seen it before.
Yeah. I just kind of I don't know. I figured it out one day.
The uni knot is king. I've used
Yeah.
Glow beads and stuff. And that's okay. You got to find the right size. They're not everywhere. That's so convenient. The uni knot thing makes so much sense.
Yep. Yeah. Just cinch it down, pull the tag in tight, and you clip it right there, and you're good to go, So yeah, I use, this is an 8/0, which is what I use for 90% of what I'm doing, tarpon fishing. And it's, notice it's not a big thick hook. It's pretty thin wire. I think it's not even like a 1X. I think it's just the regular. Even though tarpon's a big giant fish, you don't want to use one of those really thick hooks because their mouth is so crazy hard. It's like the hardest mouth on a fish that I know of. I can't think of another fish that has a harder mouth. And half the time that hook's not even penetrated their mouth. It's literally just sitting in their mouth like this. It's not actually through. So you'll go through the whole fight and that hook is just dancing around in their mouth the whole time. That's basically why it's critical to keep the tension the entire time. And that's any fish. You want to keep the tension on the line when you're fighting a fish. If the fish comes at you all of a sudden, you have to reel super fast If they come at you and you let it go, a lot of times, whoop, and no more fish. And all you had to do is reel. I've seen like the hook point will be just straight sideways like that when you reel it in. You'll still catch them. It'll fall right out when you grab them by the mouth. So anyway, that's 8/0 hook right there. Always tie that on. Crab, it's not so big of a deal, but definitely, we use pinfish sometimes. If they're not biting a threadfin, I've thrown like the middle like 50 boats. I put a pinfish out there and whacked one when no one else is catching them. They eat pinfish. It's kind of like a thing that people don't normally use. And then, so this is the setup is right here. This is an 8-foot rod. This one's by St. Croix. I don't even think they stopped making these just last year. They have a new line, but this is the Mojo Salt. It's 8 foot. It's rated for like 20 to 40 pound test, basically. It has a really stiff butt. Like that's really stiff, but I like to use a rod with a nice light tip. So if I can get it a little cramped in here. This tip is pretty light. It's that way. That's your shock absorber, basically. Is that tarpon can shake their head more violently than just about anything when they come flying out of the water, bah, 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 like just crazy, right? So that little light tip is your shock absorber right there. If you have a really stiff rod, that's more like taking your line and going like this. I mean, if you think about it, and this is why you bow to the fish as well, which is another common mistake. You always hear bow to the king, right? It's when the fish comes up and jumps, you're supposed to point your rod as far towards the fish as you possibly can to give it just a little bit more slack, which is like the typical technique. The reason for that is the fish comes up and goes like this, and they shake their head so violently. A lot of times, think about what you do when you're snagged on a dock. You go like this, and try and pull it like that, right? Because you're going no tension to extreme tension, like really, really fast. It's exactly what a tarpon's head is doing, like this. So if you can point the rod at the fish and give it a little bit more slack, it increases your chances of the hook not falling out rather than if you have full tension. The problem is what I see people do all the time is as a fish surges, right? So typically he's sitting there fighting and then he's going to take off and then they jump, right? So when the fish surges, people will dip towards the fish as he's running really fast away, and then the fish jumps. So they're already almost pointed at the fish when it jumps. So there's nothing for them to bow to, there's no more give. So I always tell my people, when that fish is surging, I mean, I have the rod like way up, like past 90 degrees above my head, fighting him, pulling up. If he surges, I really keep it up here high. I'm not pulling back on him necessarily, but just like keeping it up super, super high and keeping that rod really, really bent. That way, when he does come out of the water, you have maximum, release and tension and the maximum distance to bow. Because it happens all the time. If you're pointed here and he jumps and you bow to here, you're not doing anything. You're not really doing anything on the fish. And that's like a super, super common mistake for people. Of course, your first tarpon or your first couple tarpon, the thing jumps out of the water and you're just going to be like, the whole bowing thing is going to go out of the window. But once you kind of get the hang of it, that's a big one. And again, it's keeping that rod super, super bent, bringing it way back. If the fish is way out, you definitely want to fight the fish with the butt of your rod and not with the reel, not just trying to crank them in.
Cool. And then to finish the rest of it, what reel do you like?
Oh yeah.
What size and what line? And
so this is I like these reels right here, especially for my charters. This is a Penn Spin Fisher 6500. Yep. It's not too big. I mean, these reels are great for what I do because you can just beat them up. You can beat the crap out of them, get them wet, whatever. And I've got them loaded, typically 65-pound braid. Now some guys will use a little bit of a bigger reel, which is good too. And an 80. There's certain types of fishing in the bay and stuff like that on those bigger schools where you don't necessarily have to cast a mile. 65 is like a good all around. If I was going to have one rig, it'd be an 8-foot rod, 65-pound test, and that size reel, 6,500. You can go bigger than that and like 80-pound And some guys even use an 8.5 or even a 9-foot rod. You'll see these guys, some of the guys up on the towers that have like a leader that's 15, 20 feet long under their cork, and they spin around and then they'll cast. And it's a great way to have a nice long leader. And that works really well for those fish that are like deep in the bay. That way you can have a leader that's 20 feet long underneath the cork. And that way that cork is going down. And, if it's 30 feet deep and the tarpon are 10 feet to the bottom, it's sitting right in their face. And that's a great way to do it. But that's like a very specialized kind of thing.
Tyler, I gotta say, honestly, I have 30 pound on my setups. I never thought about going heavier on mainline.
Oh yeah.
What are some of the advantages? Because I know you do lack a little bit on casting distance when you
Sure.
bump up in your main line for braid. It might not be that much, but what are some advantages you find to having a heavier braid, especially if you're fishing off the beach and you don't really have structure per se, and capacity is kind of the mindset. I mean, it's definitely intentional. It sounds like that's the standard.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, I have a couple setups that I'll go down to 50 on the beach, 50 braid just for casting, if I was like long distance casting, want to get a little bit more out of them. But in general, I mean, 30 pound I actually started, when I first started guiding 10, 12 years ago, I had 30 pound on some of my stuff just for casting distance. The problem is over and over again, there is no structure on the beach for the fish to get into, but there's other fish for the fish to get into. So when you're fighting a fish, you first hook them, they freak out and jump, and then they go right back into the school. If there's a school of 50, 100, whatever, the tarpon will go right back into the school, and you'll feel the line going boom, 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 boom. It's like bumping off the other fish. And if you've got 30 pound braid, if it hits their mouth at all, you're going to get cut off. And the 30 pound, you're going to sit there generally and fight that. You can't, put as much pressure on the fish, and you're going to fight them for a lot longer. With 50 or even 65, you're going to, you can put some serious heat on the fish and get them in quick. It's better for the fish, and then you can go get another one. So it's more, I never, it's extremely rare. I don't say never because it happens on some really big ones, but it's very, very rare to fight a fish for more than an hour on my boat. Typically it's, that 10 to 30 minute time frame on, fighting the fish. Cause you just want to get them in and then go see if you can get another one. And like I said, it's way better for the fish to get them in quick. But basically what we're doing throughout the fight is I have a little bit of a lighter drag during the hookup. So that fish is going to, bite. Then he's inevitably, more than likely, every fish is a little bit different, but typically they freak out and run and jump and go crazy for the first minute or two. And then they'll kind of settle into the fight and bulldog. And then they might surge and jump a couple more times. And then, slowly bulldog to the boat. So as that initial freak out, I almost have it, it's a little bit heavier than what you'd use for snook and redfish on the flats, but not much. I mean, it's pretty light of a drag just because that fish is going to be going insane all over the place. You don't want to put too much tension while they're in full fight or flight mode to pull the hook out or pop the line or whatever. And then as the fight, goes on, I'll crank the drag a half a crank every, 10 minutes or so, 5-10 minutes, give them a little bit more. Once the fish slows down, crank the drag down. So by the end of the fight, the drag's really, really heavy. Now that's, for my clients. Now, typically what I do when I'm fighting the fish, I leave the drag pretty loose the entire time, and I use my hand. That's like, that way when the fish goes and he jumps, you may not, if he jumps 10 feet that way, you're not going to have enough to bow all the time. If the drag is kind of loose, I can let go with my hand and let that fish run. There's not a whole lot of tension on there. And then as soon as he hits the water, come right back on him, and really grab the spool. So I'm almost locking it down with my hand the entire time, applying maximum pressure. I don't do that with clients because you got to know how much you can apply, and you got to know when to let go. If that fish surges, you got to let go. But once you kind of get experienced enough, you fight enough fish to know what your tackle can handle. Using your hand is a big one. And even like sometimes, so tarpon will, a lot of times when they slow down and get into the fight and they're slowly swimming away, they might just be slowly pulling the drag out, just like click, 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 just a little bit. They're not really running. They're just kind of swimming around. That's when I'll have my guys kind of thread the spool with their finger a little bit and just stop that slow pull. Because you either want to be gaining line on the fish or you want that fish to be surging and jumping and taking off. Not that the slow pull, you can sit there all day and you're just walking the dog. You got to either be getting some on them or you got to be making them work extra hard. And, I don't know if you want to get into more talking about the fight and that kind of thing now. We can go into that later. But
I'd love to hear, you touched on it earlier, how you avoid the sharks. It happens to a lot of people, especially you. You get someone on your boat and it's their first time tarpon fishing and they're almost there. And all of a sudden the whole thing just turns into chaos and blood. And how do you prevent, or I know it's impossible to prevent it, but how do you help avoid some of the shark stuff and just overall conservation to try to make sure you safely release as many tarpon as possible? Sure.
So last year we had 2 tarpon lost to sharks total, which is really good. I mean, it's not good to have any loss, but there are definitely ways around it, right? So, and last year, it seems like every year the bull sharks are getting more and more numerous. I don't know what that is, but last year was like insane. There were so many sharks to the point that those big schools I was talking about that generally form in the bay just didn't really form because there were so many sharks in the bay that the fish would go into the bay and we're like, nope. And they just go right back out. So last year was, I don't know if it was an anomaly or what, but there were a lot of sharks. But anyway, so the way do you avoid them? You can kind of tell when a shark is on your fish. The fish has the initial freak out and runs and jumps and then settles into the fight. And he might surge and jump throughout the fight a few times, but they generally don't, like when they settle in and they're bulldogging when you're fighting them, they generally don't just switch directions and start running around spastically under the water. It's something like that's when there's probably a shark on them. If all of a sudden your fish freaks out and takes off and starts switching directions really fast in the middle of the fight, it's kind of like, that's kind of weird. It's probably a shark on him. And, he just saw one and he's trying to get away. So what you can do is immediately either open the spool or completely loosen the drag. So usually what I'll do is or open the bail rather. You just open the bail and just let that fish run and just let him go. Right. So generally they will, if it's not unless it's at the very end of the fight, there's not a whole lot you can do then, but generally the fish can outrun the shark and he'll take off, 200 yards of line. As the spool is open and line's flying off, we'll try and loosen the drag almost completely, just so there's just a tiny bit of tension. Once the fish is well away, close the bail and then start reeling and then motor towards that fish as fast as you can. Right. So you just pick up all that line and you motor right at him. And I'll just have my guys sit in the front of the boat and just reel up all that line. It might be 200 yards away or more. Close the bail back down, reel, just keep just enough tension, even though if the drag's going out or whatever, as long as you're picking up some line, you're good. And then you go and get right on top of the fish. You just keep reeling until you're literally right on top of them. And then hammer the drag down almost to where it's locked and just pull up as hard as you can and see. And a lot of times after that, the fish is done. He's halfway through the fight. He just ran big time. He freaked out. If he's not done, loosen the drag, back down a little bit, like normal fighting tension, and continue to fight the fish. If the shark finds him again, just repeat the process. Open the bail, let the fish run. Well, what typically happens, generally when there's sharks around, there's a big school of tarpon around, and it's likely that you stuck a fish out of that school or somewhere nearby. That school is sitting there like in a big ball like that. You hook the fish and he runs way away from it. The shark's going to lose that tarpon and he's going to go back to the school. So then your tarpon is out there by itself and is much less likely to get hit than he was right in that, because all those sharks are just right around that big school of tarpon. So at the end of the fight, it can be a little bit more difficult because the fish is tired. They're not as aware. They don't have the ability to just run full speed away a lot of times. And what you can do then is same thing, loosen the drag so the fish can run. So typically they'll come up and hit them on the surface. Tarpon comes up, the bull shark or hammerhead is right behind them. This is a little bit more risky, but what you do is literally, you see them and you take the boat and just have I have my guy reel, whoever it is, reel as fast as you can with a very loose drag. You run right in between the tarpon and the shark and you do circles around the tarpon with the boat really fast. And that just creates like bubbles and disturbance and all this stuff. And it creates like a bubble net around the tarpon. You just go like that right around the tarpon. It's intense and it's crazy. And you got to make sure no one falls out of the boat because it's the worst place you could fall out of the boat.
Yeah.
But you do this bubble net around the tarpon and then lock the drag down and get him in quickly. And then the shark and all that disturbance and stuff, the shark will lose track of the tarpon. And then, you can try and go drag him somewhere away from the school or drag him somewhere safe as you're reviving him. And let him go.
Kids listening at home, do option 1. Don't do the bubble net.
Yeah. Bubble net takes a little bit more of a little more experience and stupidity sometimes. Yeah, we've actually accidentally whacked the shark a couple times and but even then after hitting them, they will still come after the tarpon. They're so tough. They don't even seem to care.
It's crazy. Luke, just what else you got?
I had a question. When you're throwing smaller crabs, are you still using the big hook or do you size down for smaller baits? And also what size crabs are you usually using?
Sure. So in general, we use a pretty small crab. You think a tarpon is a big fish that they're going to eat a big crab, but it's pretty rare that I'll put on a crab that's it's kind of hard to get a size range here, but basically your cell phone, right? You'll see a lot of blue crabs that are the size of your cell phone. If they're that size or bigger, I'm probably not using them. Even a big pass crab. That size or smaller, if they're really hungry, they'll eat a nice big one. But the typical good size is about the size of a silver dollar. That's like the money size. It's right there. But sometimes they will eat they want the crabs that are like the size of a quarter. I mean, I've seen them out there just slurping these little bitty crabs off the surface, and they won't even look at the bigger ones. It's so weird. When it's those little purple pink pass crabs, there's 3 main types that you'll see in the passes. You've got the reddish brown kind, you've got the purple pink kind that are a little bit smaller with the longer claws, and then you've got your blue crabs. There are a couple other ones also. They're more rare. They all work, but the purple ones are much more fragile than the other species. A nice big reddish brown pass crab like that is money because they're very lively. They last a pretty long time. Or a small blue crab is extremely lively as well. That's my preferred one on the beach is a small blue crab. But it's funny. In the passes, a lot of times I've seen if they're spooky or whatever, they will hit a red or a purple pass crab 5-1 over a blue. I don't know. I have no idea why. Right. Mm-hmm. I just know that that's true. Yeah, there you go. That's the purple guy.
It's kind of, for a lot of people that are, hear about crabs, hear about pass crabs. That's traditionally what a pass crab would look like. But silver dollar size, it's hard to see in the picture, but their legs are kind of like this iridescent purplish pink. Mm-hmm. They have kind of the markings all throughout the whole body. But when people ask and they think about, it's going to try to show it up there. They think about crabs, they think about blue crabs, and it's a totally different.
Yeah. Yep. And basically the only way to get them, you can buy them at the bait store. If you wanted to, you can catch them yourself though. And they flow out around the full and the new moons on big outgoing tides in any of the passes, especially the Egmont Channel, you can get Skyway, Pass-a-Grille, the big outgoing tides. All these crabs will come up off the bottom and they come right to the surface and they flow out. You'll see everybody out there with big dip nets just scooping them up off the top. Now the one he showed was a purple pass crab, which definitely works, but they're probably the lesser of the three in general, because they just don't seem to last on a hook very well. Yeah, that's the red variety. So that's a red, and like that, you'll see the reddish kind of brown. That's a really good one. So if you look on the side of their carapace there, there's those two little white dots. That's basically where you want the hook to go through. You're hooking them in the, like on the point of those of the carapace right there. Yeah. If you look, you'll see on the underneath part of the crab, there's
Flip it around, Justin.
Yeah, I know. I wish we had a real crab. But underneath on the belly, if you look around the rim of their carapace, you'll see just inside of that little rim of the carapace, there's another little white line where their gut cavity just kind of starts. And that's where you want to put when you hook the crab. That's where you want to put it through. You don't want to put it too far in at all, because it will injure their internal organs and the crab won't last nearly as long. You're basically coming in just a few millimeters. And the way to hook them is, you don't just want to try and push the hook through, because it will likely crack the carapace of the shell, and then the crab's going to die or whatever. He's no good. So what you do is you want to take the hook point and screw it in like this until it works its way through. Just keep screwing that hook point in, just work it through, and all of a sudden the barb will pop through, and then you're good to go. And one thing that I'll do, it's really good, is I'll take a little bucket, that you can buy when you buy shrimp or whatever. You get these little buckets that are not the size of a 5-gallon, but whatever. It's a small one. And I'll have a little bucket on the front of the boat with a crab in it, hooked up, ready to go. So that way, you see the fish, it's not like, oh, there's the fish. Like, got to go and dig a crab out of the well. And then you got to wiggle the hook through just right. And then, oh, the fish are already gone. I'll have like one or two of those crabs like on a hook, ready to rock. So, even in the live well, I'll keep one in the live well in the back maybe, and then the crab on the front, especially when we're out there sight fishing. Like, I don't like to just drag them in the water, because then they're trying to swim the whole time and they're getting tired. Definitely keep them in a bucket so they're just resting and they're like 100% fresh. That way, when you get them in front of the tarpon, they're really dancing around, and then you'll get that bite.
And so on those like silver dollar to quarter size, what?
Oh yeah, the hook. Sorry, yeah. So yeah, at certain times I will definitely go down in hook size, and I'll use a little J hook. I'll use like a 5/0, octopus hook or something like that, because, like I said, there are certain times when that's what they want. Some of those really spooky days, I'll go down, with a little J hook, and you basically set the hook just the same as you would a circle hook, just reel, point the rod right at them and reel. That way, those little octopus hooks, you can't put as much tension on them as a bigger circle hook, but they help keep those smaller crabs alive, and which is what it's all about. And you'll still catch way more fish. If you impaled them with a big 8/0 hook, that's like the size of a crab. And it does work, but it doesn't work nearly as well. Just a much smaller kind of octopus style hook is what I'll use on those guys.
Cool.
Yeah.
What else, Justin? You got anything else?
No, this is an overwhelming amount of information.
I know.
Awesome.
I've got a lot.
I love
more,
it. But we've addressed leader size, we've addressed hook size, the type of rod reel combination you need to go out and do it, the things you got to look for throughout different times of the year, right? You've got this 1.5 to 2 month window, and the fish kind of stage and do different things throughout the year. And the whole thing I'm thinking, I know we do have people that the West Coast tarpon, the Gulf tarpon, do not behave the same way as an East Coast Atlantic tarpon. They, even though they're both technically Megalops atlanticus, they are not the same fish. No. They don't have the same behavior, and it's a whole different ballpark. A lot of what I do is nighttime fishing with 125-pound leader and artificials. At certain parts on the East Coast of Florida, and bait migrations are different, bait profiles are different, setups are different, and the behavior is different. As a baseline, I've always loved, and through my whole life being a Florida native, have wanted to get onto that beach migration on the West Coast, because it is a lot of fish. It's a daunting amount of fish, and the water's so clear. It's a very visual sport, and it's really like gets your adrenaline pumping. But when you do it on the East Coast, people that do travel and try to get on different bites will notice that in general, the fish on the East Coast aren't as pressured But at the same time, there's not as many fish too, unless it's like the mullet run or a minnow run where they're piled up on baits on the beach and just, blitzing baits. But it's a totally different fishery. But a lot of these things are applicable. I'm thinking now as, people travel and target different species in different areas. A lot of those techniques, roll over, the rigging and the size of the hook you're using for the type of the bait is always something to consider. The heavier line, I never thought about that. I never thought about having a heavier line as a means of abrasion resistance when you're hooking fish in schools and run the risk of having that braid get chopped. And I think that's really smart. I never thought about that.
Yeah.
A lot of us here that have been fishing our whole lives, we're still learning tidbits, from a professional like yourself to go out and be more successful. So I'm soaking it all in, man. I think this was awesome.
Good. And definitely that little uni knot on the hook will help you guys over there if you're slow trolling mullet or whatever, something like that. That's a good one.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then it sounds like, I think we did a video. I think I did it with my kids and Luke. We did one about just catching past crabs. And so we got the full and the new moon outgoing tide. So it sounds like if you're a weekend warrior and you're trying to pick a couple times over the next few months to go tarpon fishing, would you pick those 2 times? If you happen to have the ability to pick your times?
Yeah, sure. It's definitely not a secret that around the full and the new moons in June, and May, June, July, that the fish will stack up at Egmont, Passage Key, and Bean Point, and it's probably the easiest time to catch a tarpon, because all you have to do is go out to these areas on the outgoing tide, which is always in the afternoon, and once the crabs start flowing, eventually, like I said, those big schools of tarpon move into the bay and they come through. Eventually, that big school of tarpon is going to make its way past Egmont or Passage Key or whatever, and those tarpon are going to spread out and most likely start feeding on the past crabs. So literally all you have to do in those times is net a past crab out of the water, hook it on, just like I showed you, and throw it out and drift. And you can just drift, throw it out there and drift. And then all of a sudden, boom, you'll get a bite. It's really not that difficult of a time to catch one. That's why there's going to be a lot of people out there doing it too. Yep. And there's certain things to do, to make sure that you're not drifting up on other people, and make sure you're not running through all the other boats. One thing I will say, if you're going to go out there and do it on those days, there's definitely an etiquette. Is you'll see everybody's drifting in the same kind of zone. Once you finish your drift, you want to go way outside the drift and come way out around everybody, and then start to drift up front and then work your way back through. See these guys blasting through all the other boats or cutting through people and stuff like that. And it just ruins the fishing for everybody. Yeah. So you want to definitely, drift where everybody's drifting in the same spot, and then go way out around and make sure you're taking your turn. Try not to cut anybody off. You see people with lines out, you don't want to come in right in front of them, right on top of their lines, and cut them off. Go in front and drift with everybody else.
I keep seeing that fish behind you. It looks like a tarpon profile until I see the tail come to the other side.
Yeah, he's about half tarpon. That's it's an arowana. They're pretty sweet.
It's an unfair advantage to sit and watch them all day.
Yeah, he's pretty cool.
One question I have on the crab. So when you catch your own, are you taking both claws off, like claws off, claws on? Have you seen a difference one way or the other?
Sure. So actually, what I like to do, because I like to keep the crabs as healthy as possible, is I'm actually just taking the pincer off, the top pincer. So I didn't mean to flick you off.
Oh, hey, this is a family show, Tyler. Oh, whammy. Let me sneak that in here.
Wait. Just take the top pincer off like that. That's funny. My bad. But yeah, so you just I just basically take that pincer and pull it up so it leaves the claw on. That way it leaves the crab as healthy as possible, basically. And it also, there's a little bit more action on the crab. So when the crab swims one way, he's like doing a dab, right? So he goes like this, and he goes like that. So it's a little bit more action, a little bit more motion. So if he's got no claw, it still works and he's swimming around and stuff, but just that little bit of an extra dose of reality. Maybe it makes a difference, maybe not. But that's what I generally will keep the claws on all. A lot of times, you pop that off and they'll drop the claw anyway. But typically, that's what I'll do.
Sweet, that's awesome, man. We'll definitely have to book you again this summer and do one of these live out on the water. That'd be a blast.
Yeah, for sure. I mean,
that would be a blast.
Yeah, it should be good. It's already kind of there's a lot of fish out there already at the Skyway. We've had kind of a warmer spring since it busted loose in March, and we've landed a number of fish already. And I've marked a ton out there, and it's shaping up to be a good season. They're catching a lot of fish down south already, and every year it seems like there's more fish, so we should be in great shape.
Yep, love it. Well, hopefully, Luke, you get on a couple there in Boca Grande. We got the Island Rada trip coming up soon. So
yeah, are they down there on the beach already?
Not yet. I haven't even been off. I've just been out here for a couple of days, and it's been howling. It's finally coming up to get out, and then so I'll go sneak out. But the fact that the crabs are starting to flush out, I have to imagine there's some around.
Yeah, there's got to be some.
But yeah, we have a bay boat now, so I'll be out there after them.
I've seen you out there running around. Cool, man.
Cool. Well, where can everyone follow you? I know Instagram.
Yeah, Instagram. If you type in at Captain-Tyler-Kapela, or if you just type in Captain Tyler on Instagram, I'm the first one that pops up. That's the best place. My charter company is Hit and Run Fishing Charters. But again, Instagram that's like, if I catch anything, I'm always posting stories and like catching anything that day. Pretty much, I'm posting stuff all the time. That's where I'm most active. So Instagram's the way to go, but also on Facebook.
Yeah, definitely follow Captain Tyler and book him for a trip. We did it, I guess, 2 different times. And we had our buddies there, John, James, the twins. And, they really wanted to go out and catch some big redfish and snook. And, sometimes when you're entertaining, like, you don't also want to be trying to have to put people on fish. Like, we're going to hire Tyler. And you got both those guys on their first redfish and first snook, big ones too.
Yeah, nice.
And we had an absolute blast and just caught a ton of fish. So it was fun.
Yeah, man. Yeah, it was a blast. Well, hopefully we can get you guys out there. I know, if this July is anything like last July, it's going to be, amazing. So I look forward to tarpon season as soon as it's over. That's my favorite type of fishing. I can hunt tarpon all day for 12 hours a day, every day. I just love it.
Yeah.
So there's nothing like it.
Cool. Awesome. Well, brother, thank you again for taking the time to do this.
Yeah, you bet, man.
Everyone make sure to go follow Captain Tyler and then leave us questions at saltstrong.com/podcast. We put every one of these episodes right there in the fishing tips section and leave us a comment that comes right to us. And if it's something that's specific to him, we'll forward it over to him. And if you have any other thoughts on this, and we'll probably do, I think, Justin, towards the end, you started talking about East Coast. That would be interesting, even doing just on, because I know we were talking about we were going to do a little fly fishing. I feel like each one of those could be its own segment because there's just so many little nuances. So I think we could do some more.
Canals would be a good one too. Those a whole different ball game. Those fish would drive me crazy.
They're pretty picky.
Oh yeah.
Yep. Cool, guys. Well, enjoy the rest of the week. Thank you, Captain Tyler.
You bet.
We will see you out in the water.
Thank you.
My pleasure, guys. Thanks a lot.
See you guys.
'Cause fishing, it's in my soul, it was pain.